we talked about how in the book Blink, how the psychologist would put a camera on a husband and wife, or they were engaged to be married, and he could predict with like 95% accuracy whether these people would divorce within the first 3 years. And he would have them talk about anything for an hour, but he was really just looking for one specific thin sliced look. And it's
the disgust.
It's contempt.
Yeah.
And he's like, marriages survive money problems, infidelity. They don't survive. You're stupid. And so he's playing poker with these people, man.
Yeah.
So what are these looks, these gestures that you pick up on that you're like, oh, they're bluffing, or they have a good hand?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So let's assume that in my first situation, let's say that you do have the ability to just look at things, generally speaking, with an objective perspective.
Okay.
And when you're looking and you're creating these baselines, like there's a reason why he probably has them talk for an hour, because he needs to get the rhythm of how they are in their natural state.
Right.
And this is, detectives or people, interrogators, they create baselines.
Okay.
And baseline, what I mean by that, I think but basically it's, you find out, you try to sense how people are in their natural state. How are they acting when they are totally normal and natural?
Okay.
And
not in distress.
Not in distress, or even in distress. How are they acting when they are in distress? Okay. You got to create a baseline for when they're in distress.
Okay.
Because when they are in distress and then something changes, sometimes I know how someone is when they're in distress, and then what you're looking for is changes in the baseline.
Okay.
And whenever there's a moment, I'll revisit this in a second, but I want to say it's not just how they act. It's you have to be very sensitive to energy also. Energy is so important. What is their vibe?
Yeah.
What is the energy you're picking up? And really pay attention to the emotions it creates in you. And like I said, if you have to be fundamentally, it goes to the other question, how can you trust what you're seeing? The way you trust it is you check yourself. You check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? No,
yeah.
It's like you make sure that you're not putting your ego there, and you are paying attention to your emotions and the energy you perceive.
Yeah.
Because you're creating a blank space, and you're watching with genuine curiosity, and you're trying to understand. And this also goes into relationships and stuff. At least for me, it's worked. But I just truly believe that if you really are creating a wholesome, open space to understand and to be curious, that you can really trust instincts. Be careful not to make specific determinations of what those instincts are saying. Like, ooh, this person's energy just is very anxious. They're bluffing.
Yeah.
Boom. The dangerous part of that is saying they're bluffing. Well, maybe they're anxious because they have the nuts, which in poker that means the best possible hand. Maybe they have the nuts, and they're nervous because they have the nuts, or maybe they're nervous because they're bluffing. Both could be true. Don't be careful not to associate a meaning yet, right?
Yeah.
Just pick up the vibe and just notice it, and you create baselines. I mean, so for example, I remember one time recently, I was playing poker. It was a really big game, and this guy, I could sense that he was very alpha. It was very important for him to feel in charge. At least that was probably true. That seemed like I could tell his vibe was very aggressive. He often was one-upping anybody. He didn't like to be bullied. Like if someone was betting at him, he didn't want to fold a lot. And I could tell that he was targeting me a lot. Like he had a little bit of a thing against me.
He didn't like Filipinos.
Yeah, he doesn't like the Filipinos, especially
the ones that are taking his money.
Yeah. And anyways, he was just being so aggressive, and I kept on having mediocre, pretty good hands, and I was trying to create a baseline. So I was folding, And I was trying to create this baseline to see how he felt when he was like confident, when he's feeling like he's bowling. And and there's one time whenever he bet and he made a big play, a huge play, and I had a pretty weak hand at pocket fives, which means 2 5s in my hand, but the board is wild, and I really didn't think that he was I thought he was probably bluffing, but my hand was so weak that maybe he was bluffing with a hand maybe better than mine. And he thought he was bluffing. Like he might have had a 7 on the board, which beats pair of 7s beats a pair of 5s. But so I didn't want to risk all this money, but I really wanted the data because I felt like, so I paused and I really sat in it and I was present and I was curious, like, what does this energy feel like? Okay, it feels like that. This is so important. What does he look like? Oh, he's like got this kind of aggression. He's staring me down this way. And I got all these tells, but I didn't know what his hand was. I suspected it, but I was being careful not. And so what I did was I paused, and I could tell, because I'd created a baseline, I knew that he was a very alpha personality. So I fed into that, and I just showed my hand face up, and I said, I fold. I was like, I think you have it. I think you got such an amazing hand right now, and I folded face up, which means I gave up on the hand. But I did it to entice his, and what he did was he picks up his cards and he shows me 10-4 offsuit and this big bluff, and he shows it. He's like, yeah, like this, and he was like so happy. And of course, I'm just like, man, gosh, you bluffed me. And I was like, yeah. But he didn't know that I just studied every piece of him. I watched his energy. I felt his energy, and I watched his facial expressions and I did it on several hands in a row. And so what I really was doing was creating a baseline. And I did. And so what happened was later, like we could talk about it in another episode, but long story short, I got in a big hand with him, and I played it in a way where I enticed this huge bluff. I played it, and it just, his alpha, and he just goes all in with a huge amount. And I didn't know if he had me beat or not. I had a pretty good hand, but I was like, I don't know. And then I waited for a moment, and then I went with some reads based on baselines, and things changed. And then I called him, and I was right on it. It was awesome. I took all his money, and it all ended up to that moment, right? Yeah. But I wouldn't have been able to make that decision if I didn't have a baseline and I didn't see spikes in those moments. So I'm very opinionated on this part.
Would you call that the long game?
No, probably not. I mean, yeah, you could say I'm playing the long game, and a lot of times you're playing with players for not just that game, but for months and years to come. So you're creating baselines all the time. That's the fun part of poker. But what I try to be careful of is he smirked this way instead of this way. He looked down instead of up this way. And those specific actions, you have to be very careful, because one specific action doesn't always mean this thing. It's a compilation of all the things together. I think that, whenever that little grimace that people might make in those marriages or whatever, what he was really looking for was an authentic feeling of contempt, right? And I see that in poker a lot, like there's a flash of fear, or there's a flash of, but what that is there's the baseline, and then there's a flash, and you go, interesting. And I think it takes a skill to be able to determine what that means, right? But a lot of times people say, they move their hand this way, they're bluffing. Every time they move their hand like that, that means this. Maybe it does, but I'm not, like, I've found that you need way more data, and you have to be able to let your ego aside, and if you don't know, you don't know, and it's better to create the baselines. You don't have to tell people all the data you're gathering. Yeah. You know what I mean? But you can compile all of this and make really good decisions out with it. And it's the same thing in life, like in business and people. I just think life is a big poker game.